Hello everyone and welcome to our On Tap Maple Sugaring in New Hampshire program, co-sponsored with the Howe and the Hanover Conservancy. Thank you to everyone who came in person and thank you to everyone who's joined via Zoom. My name is Marilla Hartkoff. I'm the program coordinator for Hanover Conservancy. For those who might not know, Hanover Conservancy, we're the oldest land trust in New Hampshire, local land trust in New Hampshire. And we work to conserve land and water in our community. And we also have worked to host outreach and events like this one. And we're really thankful to have great partners like the Howe to do this. And I just want to switch right over to the important people to talk. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have Tim Bent of Etna, and then we also have Rich Menge from Maple Leaf Farm in Lyme. And so kind of how we're going to run this program tonight, we're going to show a quick video. It's about 20 minutes long, and then Tim will present, and then we'll switch to Rich, and he'll present, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So for anyone that's on Zoom, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll get them to our presenters, or we might have you unmute if it's depending on how many people are online. And without further ado, we'll switch to the video.
Yeah. So that's how we do it. And to start off, you need a wood pile, and I use about I don't know, it depends on the year, around 5 cords maybe. And slab wood I get from my friend up in Orfordville, and I get lots and lots of slab wood, and in return he gets a little syrup. But anyway, and then I also get wood out in the woods. And the buckets are up by my sugar house in the woods because it's flat up there, and I have about 175 buckets. And then also some pipeline, which is also on our farm. And you saw me tromping around in the woods trying to fix some of it. And I also have borrowed trees up at Granger Morgan's on Morgan Road off Redsboro Road in Etna. And I look after his house. He lives in Pittsburgh, but he grew up in Etna. And the family lets me use those trees, and that's all on pipeline. And it's along stone walls, and it's all gravity and runs downhill. And I have 3 collection points up there. And to gather it, you saw Seth doing it with a tractor with the buckets, and that's the way I also drive the tractor over to Morgan's and pump it out of the collecting tanks there and bring it home and pump it again, so the sap makes its rounds through a pump. So all that aside, I got interested in sugaring when probably when I was a little boy. My father, in it's called the Three Maples, and it's on Benton Road, where I grew up. And when I was in high school, I took a welding class instead of sitting in study hall. 1 year, I think I was in 11th grade, because I got sick of looking out the window in study hall. So I took a welding class with a friend who was a couple years younger, Andy Davis, who lived on Elm Road off of Dogford Road in Etna. And we made a little evaporator out of some old angle iron and tin, and had that set up at our house. And we made a little tin shelter. It was tin that came off an old barn that got torn down up there. And we had a blast. And then I thought, wow, this is pretty fun, and built a sugar house, which is still up there, but it's not used as a sugar house anymore. I used it for quite a few years, and we graduated from this flat pan with the thing that we made in school to a 2x6 liter. And it had a front pan and a back pan, and the back pan had drop flue. So I drove up to St. Albans, Vermont years ago and bought that and used it in my new sugar house that I had built for I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. And then there was a farmer on Dogford Road who was moving and leaving. And he had a 2.5 by 8 Grim evaporator. And I wanted that. I wanted to get larger. So, and it's John Richardson's sugar house now because he bought that farm. And I bought the sugar house. I owned it for, I think, 2 days. And I wanted the evaporator that was Howard had. So I got that evaporator. Dean Kroll helped me move it. And a couple other people. The thing weighed a ton. And John Richardson, that's when I met him. And he bought my little 2x6. So he could continue to sugar. And he still has that thing and still uses it. And then I wanted a bigger sugar house and a bigger evaporator. So up beyond the one I made right out of high school, further up, I built that thing in 1976. Yep. And a cement truck. Back in those days, the road was open more, and it was a Miller truck, and the cement truck driver drove up there. So I do have a cement floor and no electricity. Then I sold the 2.5 by 8 evaporator and acquired a 3 by 12 evaporator that I use now. So that's a progression of that. And then, but to get any sap, you need to tap the trees. And this is the old bit brace thing that I used to use. And I don't remember where I got it, but I drilled many, many holes with it, lots. And I thought I'd get more modern. So I bought a Tanaka power drill from Kibbe's, where the pump came from also. And I used, that thing was pretty good. And I used it for probably 4 years maybe. And I had it in the bucket of my tractor, and it fell out of the bucket of the tractor, and I didn't stop in time, and I ran over it, and that was the end of that thing. So now I use this, and I think everybody does. Rich does too. And the old bucket spouts, these guys go to this, and they take a 7/16 bit, which is this guy, and you drill in 1.5 to 2 inches. That's that. And that goes in here also. And then for the tubing, I use 5/16 inch tubing. I think Rich does also. They also have 3/16, but some people like it and some don't. 5/16 seems to work great. So this is 5/16 bit. And to gather it, we use 5-gallon pails like you saw Seth doing. This is an old one. And in the old days, they had sap yolks, and this is one. Go like that, and you can put pail on each side so you're balanced. Try not to go in the snow too much if it does snow anymore ever. And this is a different style bucket with a lid, and this is a flat lid that also would go on here. You know, but this stuff goes in the tree, and it doesn't have a hook, but it would. And then you don't have to cover every time you want to empty the bucket. You just flip the top up, it leans against the tree, and away you go. So, my sugar house that I have now, I only caught it on fire once, and then it was design error. I had a rafter that was too close to the pipe, and after it was there a long time. After, I don't know, a little over 20 years, the rafter couldn't take it anymore. And so, and I have a fiberglass roof on that building. And I smelled something really funny, and sort of like I thought maybe I'd burned some syrup in the front pan, which you have to be very careful. You have to pay attention when you're boiling. it's always an adventure in a sugar house. So you have to pay attention to a lot of different things. So I smelled something really unusual, and my pans were boiling normally. And then I walked around to the back of my evaporator, and the smell got worse. And I looked up, and the rafters were burning, and fiberglass roofing, that stuff burns too. So I had my own bucket brigade with sap, and I put the fire out, but it kind of made a mess. It took me the rest of that day and half of the next day to clean things up, but I got it going again. So that was that. And I've improved my sap line. When I first put the tubing up, I didn't know what I was doing. I should have taken a class on it, but I didn't. I thought I knew, but I didn't. When I first put it up, it worked really well. But I didn't use bigger line. I only used the 5/16, and I had lots of taps on it, and it went for a long distance. In the first year, it worked great. I had all kinds of sap on my tubing lines. And then the next year, it still did. And it was, in those days, we had more normal weather than we're having now. So you could compare year to year better, I think. And the next year, it still worked pretty well, but I thought not as well, and the weather was good, and et cetera. In the third year, the sap production really slowed down. I thought, what the heck is going on here? And then I went down to Bascom's, and I did take a class, and I should have had larger main line up into the woods, and that you only should have, I don't know, no more than maybe 15 before it goes into the main line taps. That's what they say. Somebody told me once, strive for 5, but that's, I don't know. You don't need to be that particular. So I've improved. I ran some main line, which I have some 1/2-inch pipe, use string wire under tension, and then wire tie with rebar wire ties the main line to the wire that you strung from however you hook it to, trees or posts, or I go from tree to tree, and stretch it with a fence stretcher so it's nice and tight. So there are no sags. You try not to have sags in your lines, even all the lines. So now back to getting better sap again. And the reason I think that it would slow down the sap going through the lines is over a period of time, these things stretch. Well, not these are the drop lines, but the lines through the wood stretch, so they get more occluded. And also, if they get dirty, you might get plugged up with some gobs of bacteria that accumulates in the lines or whatever. And I don't clean the lines at the end of the year. I pull the taps, and then you go like that, drain these things, shake them, and get the sap out. Go back the next day maybe, and then plug them in to keep the little wasps and things. It keeps the spouts clean. They last longer. And then when I tap again in the spring, I let it run on the ground for a while, half a day or whatever it takes if the sap is running, to flush out what had been trapped in there all summer and clean them out. I don't know what. Oh, and up at Morgan's, there's an old sugar bush which I used to use, and I don't anymore. I use the trees along the stone walls now. But this is an old can that we found, and it was the Emerson farm, and they used to make lots of syrup. There's some beautiful old trees up there in the woods still. And when I first started up there, all the pasture pine was growing up, so I cleaned it all out. And it's still pretty nice, but this is no gallon certificate that he had that we came across. So it's kind of cool to have. It's probably 100 years old, I think, by now. It might be. So, and then this is the grader kit that you saw me using. And there are some photos in here of some Etna, Dean Kroll, and Dean's father, and Howard Reed checking his sap buckets up on Dogford Road. What else did I miss? Gotta be something. Yes.
What's the optimum age of a tree to be tapped?
The 12 inches DBH, diameter breast height. That's what I just look. And that can take one tap. And for 2 taps, I don't know, a couple feet, maybe. I don't over tap. Sometimes you'll see people, I try not to. And then a great big tree like that, you could put 4. So.
They don't get retired?
Hmm?
They don't retire the trees at a certain age?
No, I try to be nice to them. And they say you can, they're pretty hardy. I don't know. I always wonder about that. And they do so many studies up at the UVM farm in Vermont. And I don't know, they say that you can't overtap and kill a tree, but I think it's a nice thing to be nice to their trees. Yeah. Yes?
Tim, can you talk about when the tap runs or when the sap runs, like what the temperature?
Well, yeah, when this time of year, and it gets earlier, it has been getting earlier the last few years. People are tapping in February, and I started to, and I'm repairing sap lines and adding to some new short lines also. So my buckets are all up, and most of the sap lines are. But this time of year, when sun's out more, it's warmer, it has to freeze at night, and an optimum up to above freezing, up to 40. That's at best. Yeah. And it's usually through March, sometimes into April. Yeah.
Okay, your slab wood, is it mostly pine or you got?
Pine and hemlock.
Oh, pine and hemlock, no
Yeah.
hardwood in there?
No, once in a while,
Yeah.
it's,
You prefer the softwood though, that gets it, softwood, that works fine for you.
yeah, it does.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, the price is right.
Yeah,
And yeah, he's a good guy. I like to visit with him.
sure.
I burn anything.
No, I hear you.
Yeah, yes.
Tim, when you're filtering, what are you filtering out? What are you trying to?
The niter, did you see the color of the
bag?
phone filter, the bag? All that stuff. It's mucky.
And
It's
that's
called
just
niter.
part of solid parts of the sap? or-
Yep, it's in the sap.
Yeah.
Yep. You never know if you look at the sap, it looks like water. And also it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And some sap is sweeter than other sap. If the sugar content's 2% or lower, takes longer, more sap, more wood. Yeah.
What determines the grade? Is it just the quality of the sap that comes off? or-
Yeah. Somehow, yes. Usually, beginning of the year, the syrup is lighter colored, and as the year later on, when it's warmer, more, I guess, bacteria grows in sap. You'd say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it gets darker, and then in the old day, everybody always used to clamor over getting the first syrup. They used to call it fancy, and everybody said, yeah, that's the best stuff. And now everybody, it's gone the other way. Everybody always wants the dark stuff
The dark.
first. Seems like it is. It's more flavorful. Has a different flavor. It's all good. It's all delicious.
You said you're using a 3x12 now,
Yes.
and what's your total number of taps?
This year I'll probably have between 500 and 550. And the past 2 years, was hoping to make over 100 gallons. And I haven't. The last 3 years, each year I've made about 65. So I don't know if I'm blaming that on the climate, because last year it didn't last as long for me. It also depends on what side of the hill you're on, where you're located. Yeah.
So purely from an economic standpoint, there's a lot of other issues, but when would you consider going to an RO machine?
Oh, I've thought about that, but I don't know. It probably would be worth it for me to do that, because it's so much less wood, which is so much less work and time. And I'm getting older. I'm not half as strong as I used to be. And, and there are a lot of different factors. But I don't have a warm place to keep one. I'm not that familiar with it. Rich probably could tell you, ask him that question. If you need a warm room that doesn't freeze, and I don't have, my sugar house is not set up like that. But it would be a good thing to have, I think.
And what is that? What are you talking about?
Reverse osmosis.
Oh, okay.
Machine. When, I don't know, what is it when it comes out? To get rid of 75 or 80% of
You can easily get rid of 3/4 to maybe up to 90% of the water before you boil it. So when you have a reverse osmosis, you're really, saving that much time and that much energy.
Yeah.
As Tim says, it's hard to get up in the morning after throwing a bunch of wood in the evaporator.
It's fun. It's still fun. The worst part of the whole thing is cleaning up the mess you made when you're all done. Wash the buckets, clean the pans, look at the empty wood shed. That's got to be filled back up again before you can start. Things like that.
Yeah, but you think about that $85 a gallon, that makes it easier, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. And I sell half pints, quarts, half gallons, and if somebody wants a gallon, I'll make them a gallon. Oh, because I have gallon containers too. But
Are there any regulations you have to meet to sell it commercially? Does the FDA get involved, or do you have to get any sort of permit to sell it commercially?
No, Rich sells it at the co-op, Lebanon Co-op, and I used to sell it at the Hanover Co-op years ago. And the only thing they made me do is have insurance. And then I did that for a few years and then stopped because I could sell it myself and didn't have to bother with the co-op. But I don't know if there are any more guidelines than that these days, or I don't know.
Not really. I mean, some places inspect you before they take you on as a client.
Uh-oh.
Or a supplier.
There's another reason I know that.
I sell syrup to Colby Sawyer, and they sent somebody from Ohio out to inspect my sugar house.
Did they?
Yeah. I was a little nervous. Everything went well.
No hot dogs in your sugar house.
What's that?
No hot dogs in your sugar house.
No. But those are darn good hot dogs.
Not
I
bad.
have your presentation up when you're ready.
Okay. So, what am I done?
Yeah.
So that's that.
I think that's
Okay.
Tim.
Hi, I'm Rich Menge. I also grew up around here, but I'm not a native because I moved here when I was about 6 months old. My folks bought Maple Leaf Farm in 1956. When like I say, I was less than a year old. My dad was a professor at the college, and when he did that, he was kind of an outlier. Lyme was way the heck out in the booty buggers. And, we didn't have that nice Route 10 like we do now. It was all curvy and windy and hilly. I grew up there and followed a few years, I think, behind Tim at Hanover High School. Our farm has been making syrup for probably over 100 years, well, definitely over 100 years. Let me see how I prove this. Just to kind of put things in perspective, New Hampshire is kind of a small timer here in terms of the U.S. production. We have about 10% of the taps, or the maple taps, that Vermont has. So we make less than 10% of the syrup that Vermont makes, but we certainly make very good quality syrup. And I like to say it's quality, not quantity. So this is a picture of our sugar house. So we're on Route 10. We're the gateway farm to Lyme, right on the Hanover Limetown line. My wife Jackie is in the front here, as well as my daughter Catherine and Bryce, my son-in-law. As Tim mentioned, sugar houses are prone to catch on fire. This is what we think is probably the 4th sugar house on the site. I was boiling as a kid on the 3rd one, and after college, I wasn't doing sugaring for a few years. My dad was, and he managed to have the sugar house burned down after everybody went home, so that's kind of tragic. So this is kind of our crew, my wife and I, my daughter Jen, here, her wife Monica, Catherine, and Bryce. And that's our sugar house. Our sugar bush, this is outside the back door of our house. This is the oldest part of our sugar house, sugar bush. We've got about 25 acres of maples. As I say, these trees, many of these trees, especially over that side here, have been tapped well over 100 years. These are some of our newer trees, and you can see the pipeline. We have about 1,500 taps, and we have 20 buckets. And the buckets are always the hardest ones to get gathered. This is in the spring. This was when we had snow, I think last year maybe. So what Jen is doing here is she's wearing this belt here, and she's putting taps on the drop lines. So what she does is this has hot water in its little battery powered unit. And I also have a tool that'll push these spouts on, but I actually use new spouts every year. And so the little hot water, and I can put the spout on. UVM came up with this spout. It has a little check valve in it, a little ball check. And what that does is it fools the tree into not knowing that it actually has a wound. Because what happens is you have, as Tim mentioned, the sap lines are up all year round. And so the first year they're sterile, but after that, they're not. So what this does is it prevents sap from getting sucked back into the tree at night or on vacuum systems. Anytime you have a disruption in your system, it'll backflow into the tree. And so those check valves are effective at producing more sap in the spring. Sometimes we're fortunate to be able to have enough snow to run on snowshoes. It's kind of a mixed bag. You're carrying a lot more weight when you're on snowshoes, but the footing is more even. Again, Tim mentioned drill. I like to carry everything on me. So this is how I run around in the woods. So I'll drill the tree, and then I will put my spout in. And I got something else attached to me here. This is my hammer. I don't use a carpenter's hammer. I use this because with a carpenter's hammer, I could drive that spout all the way through the tree. So this is intended especially for folks, if you've got people helping you, to help you limit the damage to the tree and to get a nice tight connection with the tree. You can see one of our buckets there that my daughter Catherine is tapping. This is the inside of the back of our sugar house. We have 2 locations where our sap is collected in the woods. And at the end of the day, or at the end of a good run, we'll pump it into this alleyway. I've got 3 tanks with a total of 3,000 gallons of covered and cool storage. So one of the things that I like to do is, if I can, in the beginning of the season, I'll try to store sap and I'll try to boil every other day that it runs. If it's good and cold, I can get away with that, and the quality of the sap is still good. This is the inside of our sugar house. This is our evaporator. When I started back in '87, I set up this sugar house in where it is now. This used to be a horse barn. We added concrete flooring. You can kind of see where the horses nibble along the edges of the wall studs there. That's kind of we kept that just for sentimental purposes. But this is an oil-fired evaporator. We took out, the first evaporator I had was a wood-fired beast. That evaporator was twice as wide as this and twice as long. It was 4 feet by 16 feet. And we were actually doing sugaring kind of on the order that Tim does when I was a kid. If we made 100 gallons a year, we felt we were lucky. We would put out around 600 buckets. And when I was in high school, we switched to tubing, and so we had a very rudimentary tubing system. So back in the 80s, when I set up the sugar house in here, that 4x16 was a good rig. When we fired it up well, we were getting 5 gallons an hour off of it. We quickly went from 100 gallons to a couple hundred gallons a year as my tubing got better. And then in 1999, I hired a professional tubing installer to retube our whole bush. And we got more taps, we got new tubing, we got state-of-the-art tubing setup. And we were producing 300 or 400 gallons of syrup. And the last couple of years, I was going through 35 cords of wood, and I said, this is not sustainable. I had a real job. This is just a hobby, out of control. So after a few years, I did get a reverse osmosis machine. I had got my first reverse osmosis machine. And so I downsized to an oil-fired 3x12. And then about 8 or 10 years ago, we switched around again and got an even bigger reverse osmosis machine and then an even smaller evaporator. So as I say, this is 2.5 feet wide, 8 feet long. The sap comes in the back here. This is something called the steam away. And what that does is it actually uses the steam from the back pan to preheat and actually with air is able to bubble up the sap where the steam is going through these pipes, and then that actually causes a release of steam. So we get almost twice the efficiency in this back pan with this steam away. The sap then works its way through to the front. This is a float box which controls the sap flow from the back pan into the front pans. And then we draw off syrup in the front here. This is an automatic draw off. It's basically connected to an electronic thermometer. And once you get things set up, it'll open up a solenoid valve here when it's at the right temperature. It takes a while to dial things in every day, but it works really well. So here's another picture of the syrup in the front pan. This is either a fancy or a medium grade syrup. And Catherine is getting ready to draw off there. Here's the draw off. This is an 8-gallon. This actually used to be a milk receiver that they had in a dairy barn, and they would put it under vacuum, or actually they would milk the cows and then pour the milk in there. But I use this. So this is, as I say, an 8-gallon container. Sometimes things get a little wild on us, and we end up drawing it off into another bucket, and then we'll feed it into this container here because we still have to filter the syrup. This picture here is showing us, this is probably the first draw off of the night, where we're trying to calibrate the automatic draw off. We use a hydrometer. Most sugar makers do that. 7 degrees above the boiling point of water is roughly syrup, but to get a syrup that meets the quality standards for agricultural inspectors, you need to have a hydrometer. And you can see the little red line here. If the red line, if you can't see the red line, it means the syrup is too thin. If it's floating up and you can see the red line, then the syrup is a little bit thick. So I'm giving away extra product here, extra thick syrup, unless I mix that down, dilute it down a little bit. So this gadget here replaces the cone filters that Tim uses and I used to use. This filter here will take anywhere from 50 to 100 gallons of syrup before it plugs up. And I suspect, Tim, that you have syrup that at times you're lucky if you can get a gallon through some of those cloth filters.
Sometimes, and this year I'm not using them. I'm putting in the top of my canner.
Yeah.
Using flat
filters, yeah. This guy is very nice though. When it works well, it works really well. We tend to pull off anywhere from 15 to 25 gallons of syrup an hour. So we're going through a lot of sap and we're making a lot of syrup. So my little 8-gallon container doesn't hold that much. It's about 20 minutes worth of syrup when things are going really well. So I've got a bunch of stainless steel pails, and we'll fill those by hand if things get ahead of us. But this filter press has little plates and frames that are separated by filter papers. And then we use a food grade diatomaceous earth, which grabs onto and creates filter media, which is held back by the paper filters. So that's what allows us to get anywhere from 50 to 100 gallons of syrup through that. We do change the papers every night and wash the filter every night. But that syrup is coming directly from where we drew it off. It comes through the filter, and then it comes out through this milk hose, sanitary hose, and into this canner. This is a 40-gallon canner. It's got heat underneath of it, and I have the ability to either fill individual containers through this spigot here, or this valve here. I'm able to fill barrels, and I fill barrels. I have 15, 30, and 40-gallon barrels that I use. We also, Tim and I are in the New Hampshire Maple Producers Association. And so we use the Maple Producers jugs. And we can, a lot of jugs up during the season and many thousands more during the season, after the season. This is our filter table. And we like to turn the jugs upside down. It gives us a chance to put a batch number on the bottom of the jug. And it also allows us to seal the entire container. We actually have some folks in the audience here that were at our sugar house a couple of years ago. We had a nightly record, 140 gallons of syrup that we made. We've commemorated it with a paper plate that was cut out. Now that hangs on the wall. And that's about it. There's my dog, Rosie. I think that's it. So I do have some tubing here. We have gone to very high vacuum. We use vacuum pumps to help pull the sap out of the trees. As a result, I don't need to put very many holes in the trees. I can still get the same amount of sap. I'm heading towards just one tap per tree, regardless of the size. I'll tap a tree that's 10 inches in diameter, but research shows that those trees don't produce as much sap nor as sweet a sap as a bigger tree. So the best tree, one of the other questions was how big a tree. I mean, obviously you can tap a 10-inch tree, but if you've got the opportunity to tap an 18 or a 20-inch tree rather than a 10, if you're doing backyard stuff, you'll get sweeter sap and you'll get more sap out of a 20-inch tree than a 10-inch tree. One of the things that we like to do, that I like to do, is chase leaks. A little squirrel chew can cause anywhere from a half an inch of vacuum leak all the way up to 1 inch. If you've got a spout that is pushed out of the tree or a fitting that's gotten loose, you can start losing vacuum. You generally get about 5% more sap for every inch of vacuum that you have over 15 inches. So if you have 25 inches of vacuum, you're getting 50% more sap than if you had 15 inches. I've got a finite number of trees, and so the only way I can make more syrup is by getting more efficient in the woods. As I mentioned, when I was a kid, from our 400 to 600 taps, we would be lucky if we made 100 gallons in a season. We drew off of milk cans exactly like Tim has. We also had no electricity at our sugar house, and so we would schlep the syrup down from the sugar house to our house. Our sugar house was kind of in the middle of the woods because back then you were gathering by pail, and you wanted it kind of centrally located. Now, in terms of production, I find it a game to try to catch the leaks and find the leaks. And so once I get up to about 28 inches, I'm really, really happy. That usually allows me to make about half a gallon a tap, which is about a quart more than what the national average is for sugar makers. So a combination of spending time in the woods and having tight tubing really allows me to get the production.
When you say 28 inches, what are you referring to there?
So the way vacuum is measured, it's measured in inches of mercury.
Okay.
And a perfect vacuum is around 30 inches. So you can't get on this earth, you can't, at sea level, you can't get any higher vacuum than that. It's physically impossible. My pump will do about 29.9. But, I've got 2 or 3 miles of 3/4 inch to 1 1/4 inch main lines out in the woods. And then I've got about 6 or 7 miles of this stuff in the woods. And it's always me and the squirrels and the deer. And right now, I'm winning. But it doesn't take much, and you really have to stay on it. I mean, for a sugar maker, we make our money in the woods. We don't really make it in the sugar house. It's in the woods. If we can bring in sap, then we can process it and turn it into maple syrup.
Do you check them every day?
I try to. I also have been experimenting with a radio system and sensors, and so we've got, I think we've got about 7 of our main lines on radio vacuum sensors. Last year it kind of broke halfway through the season, but I've been using it on and off for the last 6 or 8 years. This year I just got more monitors, so I'll be able to monitor about 12 of my main lines. So I put these radio monitors at the end of each of the lines, and then that sends a signal back to my sugar house, and I can see what's going on. It's really, really intriguing to watch, because you can see what the temperature is, and you can see what the vacuum level is, and you can watch things freeze up. You can watch things continue to run at 30 degrees. I don't know how or why, but it does. And so it's just, you can go as technical as you want on this stuff, and you can spend as much money as you want on this stuff.
Like you said, it's a hobby, right?
It's a hobby, but at this point, it's my full-time job because I'm retired, and so it gets me out in the woods and keeps me busy.
Show them the catalog, all the goodies in it, Rich.
Oh, yeah. This is a great place down in Alstead, or Ackworth, New Hampshire. But this is a catalog just of maple equipment. And it used to be I'd go through there and, you'd lust after all this equipment. And now I kind of know what it is, and I've got what I've got, and it's usually well built, so it can last you a lifetime. And I've stopped growing at this point, and we're kind of done in terms of how much we're going to expand.
Can you tap any kind of maple, or does it have to be a sugar maple?
You can tap any kind of maple. I think there's some question as whether the sap and syrup tastes a little bit different. The UVM Proctor maple people have done some blind taste testing on soft maples syrup versus hard maple syrup, and say there's no difference. As some people may know, the soft maples bud out earlier, so that can be an issue if you've got a lot of hard maples. With climate change and global warming, I think we're going to be left with soft maples. So I think, in another 50 or 100 years, we're probably going to be consuming a lot of soft maple syrup. I think places further south probably have a lot of soft maple as
You
well.
tap all kinds of maple in your farm?
Our farm, our sugar bush is kind of a monoculture, and it's not really advocated. The foresters don't advocate for monoculture anymore. Most of our thinning was done 15 to 30 years ago or more. What was the question? I'm sorry.
I just was curious, on your farm, in your experience, do you
Yeah,
all tap different types?
growing up, I was told that soft maples were evil, so we cut them down.
Yeah.
But nowadays, we let them live. But fortunately, fortunate or unfortunately, we don't have that many soft maples to reseed our bush.
If you've got the perfect conditions in mid-February, earlier than usual, and then you get another deep freeze and everything stops up, is the trees, as I understand, will not begin production again afterwards? You wouldn't have 2 seasons in one season, would you?
No, you could. I mean, if you're using a traditional spout, and you're not using vacuum, what happens at the end of the day, when things contract and when they get cold, things contract, and then the sap actually gets drawn back, wants to tend to draw back into the tree. So, after the first year, this tubing is no longer perfectly sterile. So it will send a signal to the tree, that contaminated sap will send a signal to the tree that tells it, oh, I've got a wound, I should send some defense over there and stop running. But most of the sugar makers who are on vacuum, once they have tapped and turned their vacuum on, they leave it on. I mean, we started tapping, I think around the 15th. And we actually had enough sap to boil on the 18th. I was only about 2/3 tapped at that point. And then we boiled again last Wednesday, so we've made about 120 gallons so far. And our holes will still be running in April when it's making cruddy syrup. And everybody says, well, what is cruddy syrup? Cruddy syrup is, it smells funny, it looks funny, they call it ropey syrup, and it looks like rubber cement coming out of the spigot. It just, it doesn't run, it just turns to like glue, and you can't filter it. And so at that point, we might fill a barrel and take it down to these people, because they buy industrial quality maple syrup.
For what?
They use it in all sorts of things, tobacco, certain sweeteners, something, if they want to be able to say, not these guys, but some industry says we have maple syrup in our product, yeah, it's 1% and it tastes like engine oil, but it was maple syrup. So,
Rich, let me just tell people that you have samples over here.
yeah, well, we've got some samples, but yeah, if people have some questions.
Whether both of you guys are open during the Maple Sugar Week, whatever it is, there's some day that in March or somewhere, don't we tend to have sugar house openings?
There is kind of
I never signed up for that. No, I haven't. I don't.
Yeah, I also don't sign up
Okay.
for it. We do take guests by appointment, and I'd certainly, if somebody stops in, I don't tell them to go away unless I'm really in trouble, and then I'll
Gets
tell
too
them to go
crowded,
away.
you can't get anything done.
Tim puts us
Yeah.
to work. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, it's helpful to have buckets. That's what you do with your kids.
That's exactly right. Is kids love to gather buckets.
Mine are by the sugar house.
And-
I can see them out the window.
Yes.
They're good.
They are, and it's a wonderful thing because we rarely, it's the last thing that we do is gather the buckets. And so if somebody comes and they're able to gather buckets, that's a real big help for us.
Who is the biggest producer in the Upper Valley? You guys, any guys?
I would guess probably Patches at this point in
Up in
Lebanon.
Lebanon?
Yeah,
I think they have something like 50,000 taps.
that's what he's striving for.
Yeah. So they're doing a lot of acres.
Yeah. They are.
You mentioned the 10-inch trees, the medium-sized trees. When you
Right.
see an old farm and they have those big gnarly maples, the ones you can't even get your hands around, are those still tappable, those old trees?
Yes, those are still tappable, and sometimes there'll be dead zones in those trees, and so you may not get a lot of sap. You've also probably seen the traditional Vermont, New Hampshire maple picture with, like 5 or 6 buckets encircling that tree. So there's probably not a lot of good fresh wood to tap into. So on the one hand, it's probably a sweet tree if it's got that big a top, but it also may have a lot of dead zones, so you may or may not have luck getting sap. In the back?
We have a question from Drake on Zoom. He wants to know what you have found to be the best distribution method.
Best distribution,
That's what he wrote, yes.
like selling it?
Yeah. I'm assuming, yes.
Well, here in the Upper Valley, we have this wonderful food group, the Co-op, and we've been selling to them since 1987. And so they've been a wonderful market for us. I think it really depends on what you want to do and how much syrup you have. You know, I have some restaurant account. I have a restaurant account. I've got a college account. And then I've got grocery stores. And then over the years, we've developed some mail order. Mail order is tough because you're selling $20 worth of syrup. You're packaging it up. It costs an arm and a leg to send it, so you feel guilty about charging to pack it up. So you just spend half an hour packing it up and you get the $16 flat rate box and you add that to the cost. And so, you know, it's a tough way to make money.
I repeat customers. Also, our son Seth and his partner Sarah have a vegetable stand by the road now, and I sell a lot of syrup that way also.
How can the stores like Ocean State Job Lot sell a quart of syrup for $13?
That's a really good question.
It's from New York, I believe.
They are buying bulk syrup, and you know, they're buying commodity syrup that you know, the market value of bulk syrup is in the $30 to $40 a gallon range. A container is going to cost you $1.50 to $2. They're really working on pennies on the you know, a margin of pennies, and they're just going for volume.
Which, how, I use your syrup, of course, and I always think it's the best. But how do I, as a consumer, look at Ocean State or, I don't know, any other place? And I mean, you can't taste, well, I guess you can if I bought some. But is there a way of quality, is there a quality control gauge or something? I wonder more about that.
Not really. I mean, it behooves the industry not to put bad product out there. But you're right. I mean, I've always kind of been spoiled, you know. I mean, in this area, most people make good syrup. And, you know, if they're selling it out of their sugar house, most people are making nice flavored syrup. But, you know, there are bigger operations that are that, you know, may be putting out some syrup that doesn't have as much flavor as other people's. So I don't know. I mean, I've had some Trader Joe's syrup that I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be good, and it really didn't have much of a flavor at all. So I don't know. I mean, I would say buy local, and you're probably going to be better off.
Earlier, you alluded to freezing. So when it's 7 below outside, do the lines freeze?
The lines do freeze. I'm a little bit worried because I'm on vacuum. I've actually started tapping below the lateral. So if the laterals are going from tree to tree, I actually tap below the lateral and I use my vacuum to pull up. I'm a little bit concerned that with this really hard cold that we've had, that I may end up with some spouts that have been pushed out of the tree, because that line was full of sap. And so either I may end up with some that are pushed out of the tree, or they may actually push it off the fitting of the tubing and the spout. But the plastic's very forgiving other than that. But you do occasionally end up having some that push out of the tree.
Does anyone have any, just being modern, you guys don't want to keep you up there for so long.
No.
Does anyone have any last minute questions for Tim or Rich?
Sure.
Are young people coming into the field? I notice you train your families, but is UVM or UNH working with young people? Because we really need to keep the young ones coming along.
I think they are. And I think sadly, most of them are going into the mega maple world. I mean, what Tim and I are doing is so small potatoes compared to where the industry is going.
But the syrup tastes better.
The syrup definitely tastes better. But I think UVM has indicated that it takes somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 taps for somebody to be commercially viable. And that would be to be able to support one person. So yeah, there's you mentioned the patches, they've got 50,000 taps. A couple of their kids are going into it. One of them went to Dartmouth, and wants to do that as a business activity. But yeah, you see a lot of older folks at the maple meetings.